I'm Lining Singer. Today I'm going to critically reflect our learning framework, which is EYLF learning framework. So this is actually the Australia's national curriculum framework for children from birth to 5 years and also during the transition to school. This EYLF is much more than a guide for planning activities. It helps educators understand how children learn, how to support their development, and how to make professional decisions that improve children's well-being. Throughout this presentation, I will explore what is EYLF vision, its pedagogy and principles, practices, learning outcomes, and the planning cycle. Finally, we will have a look at how these elements shape educators' professional identity, ethical practices, and everyday decision making. So let's begin by looking at the EYLF vision because it provides the foundation for everything else in the framework. Before we look at what educators trying to do, it's important to understand what's the EYLF trying to achieve. So that's the purpose of its vision. So as you can see, this is the EYLF vision. So this vision is built around the belonging, being, and becoming. These three ideas work perfectly together and shape the way educators support children's understanding. So, belonging. Belonging reminds us that children learn best when they feel safe, connected, and valued. That's why building strong relationships with children and families is one of the most educators' job. So the second one, being. Being encourages educators to value children as they are today. Instead of only preparing children for the future, as educators, we support their interests, their ideas, and recognize them as capable learners. Finally, becoming. It reminds us that learning is an ongoing journey. As educators, we work together with families and communities to support children's confidence, skills, and identity as they grow. So the next question is how educators make that happen in everyday practice. So EYLF has the answer for that as well. EYLF describes pedagogy as the art, science, and crafting of educating. But I think it means much more than simply teaching. Let's see what that means. So these three ideas I have categorized from that pedagogy of my understanding. So first one is professional role. So it's about the decisions educators make every day. For example, educators don't choose activities just because they are fun. They think about children's strengths, interests, culture, learning needs before they are deciding how to extend learning. The second one, professional identity. The EYLF also recognizes children as competent and capable learners. This means educators encourage children to make choices and share ideas and actively participate in their own learning. Finally, we have professional growth. Effective educators regularly reflect on their practice. They think about what worked well, what could be important, and how can they provide even better learning experience. After understanding how educators' pedagogy work, our next step is looking at the values that guide those teaching decisions. That's the purpose of EYLF principles. There are 8 principles as you can see, but they don't work separately. Altogether, they help educators create learning environments where every child feels respected, included, and supported. So for example, think about secure relationships and genuine partnerships with families can create trust. Also, that trust provides the foundation for children's learning and well-being. These principles also encourage educators to value diversity while promoting equity and include Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders perspectives, so every child feels a sense of belonging. As a fact, critical reflection, ongoing professional learning, and collaborative leadership remind educators that learning isn't only for children. Educators also continue learning and improving throughout their career. Our next step is looking at the practices because these are the ones who show those values principles are used in everyday teaching. So there are actually 7 EYLF practices. They help educators create learning experiences that are meaningful and responsive to each child. Actually, they remind that children don't all learn in the same way. So teaching also should be flexible. These pictures I got from EYLF information sheets. So when I'm having a look at these, I think there is one practice I think especially important, that is play-based learning. Actually, it's intentional learning. Children naturally learn through play. But the educator's role is to extend that learning by asking questions, introducing new ideas, and encouraging children to think more deeply. Also, these practices encourage educators to be culturally responsive, build supportive learning environments, and work closely with the families. Altogether, these practices help educators provide learning experiences that are meaningful, inclusive, and connected to children's everyday life. But the question is, how educators know that learning is actually happening? That's where the learning outcomes become important. So the 5 EYLF learning outcomes gives educators a shared way of understanding about children's learning and development. Rather than comparing children with each other, the EYLF outcomes recognize that every child develops differently and learn on their own pace. So actually this helps educators to focus on each child's progress instead of expecting every child to reach the same point at the same time. So each learning outcome also have sub-outcomes which give educators clear indicators what children's learning might look like in practice. For example, learning outcome 2 includes sub-outcome 2.3, which is children become aware of fairness, and educators can promote this by encouraging children to share resources, take turns, respect different perspectives during collaborative play. Okay, let's move to our planning cycle. We have looked at what the EYLF values and what children are learning. So, our next step is understanding how educators use their information in practice. That's the purpose of EYLF planning cycle. So this cycle begins with observation. Educators don't just watch children and listen. They ask questions and collect information during playtime, routines, maybe during everyday interactions. They also value the perspectives of each children and their families because they provide a more complete picture of children's learning. Okay, our next step is assessment. Assessment is where educators interpret those observations and using them, they professionally acknowledge and understand of child's development. Finally, they plan meaningful and learning good experience that built on children's interests, strengths, and individual needs. After planning, educators move to implementation. So that's where ideas become real learning experiences. This doesn't only happen during planning activities. Actually, this EYLF reminds us that learning also can happen during daily routines, maybe during conversations or outdoor play. So these spontaneous movements throughout the day. So our final stage is evaluation. That's where educators critically reflect on practice. Most of the time, we always talk about how to observe children, how to write observation records, how to plan activities. But today, let's have a deep look at what evaluation means.
Evaluation and critical reflection is the 5th and final stage of the planning cycle. So far, we've explored the stages of observing, assessing, and
Actually, we have looked at how EYLF guides children's learning, but it's also important to recognize that framework doesn't only support children, it also shapes the educator. So EYLF builds educators' professional identity by encouraging them to become reflective, knowledgeable, and intentional professionals. This means educators don't simply supervise children or deliver activities. They use professional knowledge, pedagogy, and critical reflection to make informed decisions that support children's learning and well-being. Arthur and colleagues also explain that these early childhood teachers have many professional responsibilities. These include planning learning environments, extending children's learning, documentation progress, and reflecting on their own practice. Together, these responsibilities show that early childhood teaching is a skilled profession that requires continuous learning and professional growth. Building on professional identity, educators also have responsibility to make ethical and informed decisions. The EYLF encourages educators to act with fairness, respect, responsibilities, and integrity in everyday interactions with children, families, and colleagues. So Arthur and colleagues explains that includes protecting children's rights, maintaining confidentiality, respecting diversity, and building trusting relationships with families are not optional. These are responsibilities. So they have a big part of being professional educator. So this EYLF also supports decision making. Through the planning cycle, instead of making assumptions, educators actually observe children and they plan activities, make decisions that respond each children's strength, interest, well-being. So Arthur describes teaching as a moral craft because educators make throughout decisions every day about learning, inclusion, relationships, and children's safety. Combination of these ideas show that EYLF supports both professional practice and professional responsibility. Looking back at this presentation, I realized that the EYLF is much more than a curriculum framework. I learned that all its elements, including vision, pedagogy, principles, practices, learning outcomes, and planning cycle, work together to support both children learning and educators' professional practice. I also gained a better understanding of how EYLF helps educators become reflective professionals who make ethical, informed decisions based on children's strength, interest, and individual needs. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Rachel, for giving this valuable opportunity to improve my knowledge about EYLF framework.